The words hung in the air, sharp and cold, like tiny shards of glass. "You're worthless!" my mother-in-law Judith hissed, her voice trembling with a rage that had been simmering for years, boiling just beneath a meticulously polished surface. Her perfectly manicured finger, adorned with a gaudy diamond that always seemed to catch the light in a way that felt accusatory, was pointed directly at my chest. It was a silent jab that felt more violent than a shove. "You've brought nothing but disappointment and weakness to this family. Now, you're leaving this house. Tonight." I stood frozen in the middle of the living room, a space I had painstakingly painted a soft, calming sage green just last spring. The air, which should have smelled of the pot roast I'd left simmering in the kitchen, was instead thick with the acidic scent of her fury. My husband Sam stood just beside her, a perfect soldier in her one-woman army, his gaze fixed on a point somewhere over my shoulder. He wouldn't look at me. His jaw was a tight, angry knot, his arms crossed over his chest in a posture that screamed alliance. With her, not with me. He didn't have to say a word. His silence was a deafening confirmation, a second bold signature on my eviction notice. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird beating its wings against a cage I hadn't realized was being built around me. My gaze drifted past them, to the worn leather armchair in the corner where my father-in-law, Frank, sat. As always, he was a study in stillness, his gaze fixed on the unlit fireplace, his hands resting on the worn arms of the chair. He was a quiet man, a man of gentle routines and few words, a man who had long ago retreated into a world of his own, a world of history books and meticulously tended rose bushes, to escape the constant raging storm that was his wife. He didn't move, didn't speak, didn't even seem to be breathing. He just sat, a ghost in his own home, while my world, the one I had so carefully tried to build, was being systematically dismantled by the people who were supposed to be my family. My throat was too tight to speak, my eyes burning with unshed tears that I refused to let them see. It would be another sign of weakness, another thing for Judith to seize upon. I had thought we were a team, Sam and I. I had thought this house, with its creaky floorboards and sunlit kitchen, was our shared sanctuary, the foundation of a life we were building together, brick by brick. But now, standing here in the sterile glow of the overhead lights, I saw the truth in stark, brutal clarity. It was never my house. I was never truly family. I was just a guest whose welcome had finally, brutally, expired. The pot roast in the kitchen, the future I had envisioned, it was all turning to ash. I swallowed the lump in my throat, a bitter, jagged pill of humiliation and betrayal. "Fine," I whispered, the word barely audible, a puff of air in the suffocating silence, but it was all I had left. I turned to walk toward the hallway, toward the bedroom where I would have to pack the last 5 years of my life into a single suitcase, and I felt Judith's triumphant, venomous smirk burning into my back. This was it. This was her victory. This was the end. I had lost. It wasn't always like this, or maybe it was, and I was just too blinded by love to see it. I met Sam in my final year of college in Richmond. He was everything I thought I wanted. Charming, ambitious, with a disarming smile and a way of listening that made you feel like you were the only person in the world. He spoke of family with a deep, unwavering reverence that I, an only child of divorced parents who lived on opposite coasts, had always craved. His parents, Judith and Frank, were pillars of their community. Judith was a whirlwind of social engagements, charity luncheons, and condescending advice, a woman who wore her opinions like expensive, suffocating perfume. Frank was her quiet shadow, a retired history professor who seemed most comfortable in his garden, his hands covered in rich Virginia soil, a silent contentment on his face that rarely reached his eyes. When Sam and I decided to get married, they offered us the house. "It's your inheritance, son," Judith had announced, her hand sweeping across the empty living room as if she were a queen bestowing a kingdom upon a favored courtier. A proper start for a proper family. It was a beautiful two-story colonial on Meadowbrook Circle, the kind of house with a wide front porch and ancient oak trees that I'd only ever seen in movies. It was far too generous, a gift so large it felt less like a present and more like a permanent debt. But Sam was ecstatic. "See, Nora?" he'd said, spinning me around in the dusty foyer, my laughter echoing in the empty space. "They love you. We're finally a family." For the first year, it was bliss. We painted the walls, we decorated, we painstakingly made the house ours. Frank would come over on weekends to help with the yard work, offering quiet advice on how to prune the azaleas he'd planted years ago. He'd smile, a rare, gentle thing, when he saw the progress we'd made. "You have a good eye for color, Nora," he'd said once, and the simple compliment felt like a warm blanket. Judith's visits were less about helping and more about inspecting. She'd run a finger along a dusty windowsill, comment on the brand of olive oil in my pantry, or rearrange the throw pillows on the couch with a dramatic sigh, as if my choices were a personal affront to her very existence. "Sam is used to a certain standard, dear," she'd say, her tone deceptively light, but the words heavy as lead. It's so important to maintain it, don't you think?" I tried to laugh it off, to be the gracious, accommodating daughter-in-law she so clearly wanted. I told myself it was her way of showing she cared, that she was just protective of her son. But slowly, her criticisms began to seep into Sam's vocabulary, like a slow-acting poison. "Mom's right. The new curtains do look a little cheap," he'd say after she'd left, his eyes not quite meeting mine. Or, "Are you sure you want to serve that for dinner?" You know how Judith feels about anything with garlic. He never defended me. He'd always frame it as keeping the peace, as if my feelings, my opinions, my very identity were a small price to pay for his mother's fleeting approval. The cracks were small at first, almost invisible, but they were there, spreading silently beneath the surface. I remember one evening, I'd found a beautiful antique writing desk at a flea market. I spent a week refinishing it, sanding and staining it until the mahogany glowed with a deep, rich luster. I placed it in the study, so proud of my work. When Judith saw it, her lips thinned into a razor line. "An antique?" she'd scoffed, the word dripping with scorn. "You mean second-hand. Sam's father had a perfectly good, custom-made desk in storage. This just looks desperate." I waited for Sam to say something, to tell her he loved it, that I had worked hard on it, that it was beautiful. Instead, he just shrugged, a gesture of complete surrender. "We can put it in the guest room, I guess. It's a bit much for the study." That night, I cried myself to sleep, the quiet sobs muffled by my pillow. It wasn't about the desk. It was about the slow, creeping realization that in this family, my value was conditional, and Judith was the one who wrote the terms. The situation escalated dramatically when I lost my job. I'd been working as a graphic designer for a small startup in the city, and when they lost their biggest client, my position was the first to be eliminated. I was devastated, my confidence shattered, but I tried to project an air of positivity I didn't feel. "I'll find something else," I told Sam, my voice more confident than I felt. "This could be an opportunity to finally start my own freelance business, like we've always talked about." He seemed supportive at first, rubbing my back and murmuring encouraging words. But Judith saw my unemployment not as a temporary setback, but as a catastrophic failure, a weakness she could exploit. "Freelance?" she'd said over a tense Sunday dinner, her fork clinking against her plate with pointed disdain. "That's not a career, Nora. That's a hobby for bored housewives. What Sam needs is a wife with stability, with a real income, not a little art project that may or may not pay the bills." The words were a calculated slap, but the way Sam just stared at his plate, meticulously cutting his roast beef into tiny pieces, and refusing to meet my eyes, was infinitely worse. From that day on, I was no longer the successful, respectable daughter-in-law. I was a liability, a burden. Judith's unsolicited suggestions morphed into commands. She started showing up unannounced, her arms laden with groceries, to help out, as if I were a helpless child incapable of feeding my own husband. She'd go through my pantry, tutting at my organic choices, and then send Sam a detailed list of things he needed to buy from proper brands. He started giving me an allowance, a crisp stack of $20 bills he'd leave on the kitchen counter every Monday morning. "Just until you get back on your feet," he'd said. his voice strained with false nonchalance, but it felt like a leash, tightening around my neck with each passing week. The house, once our shared sanctuary, began to feel like Eleanor's occupied territory. She had a key, and she used it freely, a constant, invasive presence. I'd come home from a job interview to find the furniture rearranged to her liking, my personal books moved from the coffee table and replaced with her design magazines, a new, garish floral centerpiece in place of the simple, elegant vase preferred. Just freshening things up, dear, she'd chirp, a saccharine smile plastered on her face. But her message was crystal clear. This home was not mine to make. I was merely a tenant, and my lease was precarious. Frank, on his rare, quiet visits, seemed to notice the shift. He'd watch me with a quiet, profound sadness in his eyes, as Judith corrected the way I loaded the dishwasher or instructed Sam on how to manage our finances more effectively. He never said anything, but he started bringing me small, silent offerings from his garden. A perfectly ripe tomato that still smelled of the sun. A small bouquet of lavender tied with twine. They were wordless apologies, acknowledgments of a battle he was unwilling or unable to fight. My attempts to talk to Sam, to make him see what was happening, were futile. "You're being too sensitive, Nora," he'd say, parroting his mother's words with frightening accuracy. "She's just trying to help. We're a family, and family helps each other. You should be grateful." But it wasn't help. It was a hostile takeover of my life, my marriage, and my home. My freelance business struggled to get off the ground. It was hard to be creative, to pitch to clients with confidence, when I felt like I was walking on eggshells every moment of the day. The constant stress and Judith's relentless criticism chipped away at my self-worth until I started to believe her. Maybe I was a failure. Maybe I was worthless after all. The final, explosive fight started over something laughably small, something so full of life and hope that it had no place in the cold, sterile environment our home had become. A dog. I had always wanted a dog, and for weeks I had been secretly visiting a local shelter, falling completely in love with a gentle, 1-year-old golden retriever named Oscar. He had sad, soulful eyes and a tail that thumped hopefully against the concrete floor whenever I approached his kennel. I'd done all my research, created a detailed budget, and even found a highly recommended trainer. This wasn't an impulse. It was a lifeline, a desperate, deliberate attempt to bring some unconditional love and simple joy back into a house that had become suffocatingly cold and silent. I finally worked up the courage to show Sam a picture of Oscar, my voice trembling with a fragile hope I hadn't felt in months. "He's perfect, isn't he? I thought we could go meet him together this weekend. He's so calm and sweet." Sam's face was an unreadable mask. He glanced at the photo on my phone, then back at me, his expression blank. Before he could formulate a response, Judith, who had predictably let herself in without knocking, spoke from the doorway, her voice dripping with a familiar, acidic disdain. "A dog?" she said, as if I had suggested we build a bonfire in the living room. Absolutely not. The shedding, the dirt, the endless expense. "Nora, you can't even manage to keep a job. How on earth do you expect to take care of a living creature?" My heart sank like a stone, but for the first time in a long time, something inside me didn't just crack, it snapped. "This isn't your decision, Judith," I said, my voice quiet but edged with a steel I didn't know I possessed. "This is our home, and it's a decision for Sam and me to make together." Judith's eyes narrowed into dangerous slits. She executed a perfect pivot, turning to Sam, her expression morphing into a mask of wounded maternal love. "Do you hear how she speaks to me, Sam? After everything I've done for you, for both of you, the disrespect is just staggering." Sam looked from his mother's theatrically pained face to mine, his own face a battleground of conflict. For a heart-stopping second, I saw a flicker of the man I married, the one who might have defended me, but it was extinguished in an instant, snuffed out by a lifetime of conditioning. "She's right, Nora," he said, his voice flat and final. "It's a bad idea. We can't afford it right now. It's irresponsible." Irresponsible. The word, a perfect echo of his mother's judgment, hung in the air between us. "It's not about the money, and you know it," I shot back, my voice finally rising, fueled by months of suppressed anger and hurt. It's about her. It's always about her. You let her control every single aspect of our lives, and I am sick and tired of it. She is my mother, he yelled, his voice cracking, finally finding the passion to defend someone. She's just looking out for us. Maybe if you were contributing something, if you weren't such a constant, draining disappointment, you'd have a right to an opinion. Disappointment. There it was. The word that had been hovering over me like a guillotine for months. And in that moment, seeing the raw, unfiltered anger in his eyes, an anger that was entirely hers, a borrowed fury, I knew we were broken beyond any hope of repair. That was when Judith, sensing her victory, delivered the final fatal blow, her voice ringing with a chilling, triumphant clarity. You're worthless, and you're leaving this house. Now! Defeat is a quiet, heavy thing. It settled over me like a leaden shroud, muffling the sound of Judith's continued, triumphant tirade, blurring the sight of Sam's rigid back as he stared out the window, away from me, away from the mess he had allowed to be made. I didn't fight back. There were no more words left to say. They had all been used up, twisted, and turned against me until they were utterly meaningless. All that was left was the bone-deep, soul-crushing weariness of a battle I had already lost, long before the final shots were fired. I turned and walked toward the bedroom, each step a monumental, agonizing effort. My legs felt like they were moving through wet concrete, my body a stranger's that I was merely piloting. The hallway, once filled with photos of our wedding, of trips we'd taken to the Blue Ridge Mountains, of us laughing on the beach, now felt like a gallery of expertly crafted lies. Behind me, I could hear Judith's voice, lower now, conspiratorial and victorious. It's for the best, Sammy. You'll see. She was dragging you down, holding you back from your potential. I didn't hear his reply. I didn't want to. I closed the bedroom door gently behind me and leaned against it, the cool wood a small comfort against my back. I finally let out a single, shaky breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I pulled my old, worn suitcase from the top of the closet, the one I'd had since before I met him, before my life became entangled with theirs. It smelled faintly of dust, and a life that was solely and unapologetically my own. Methodically, numbly, I began to pack. I didn't take everything, just my clothes, my books, the few personal items that weren't tainted by their touch or their judgment. I left the furniture we'd picked out together, the kitchen appliances I'd researched for weeks, the life we had supposedly built as a team. It was all theirs anyway. It always had been. As I folded a sweater, my eyes fell on a small silver-framed photo on the nightstand. It was of me and Frank, taken last summer in his garden. He was showing me a prize-winning hybrid tea rose, its petals a delicate shade of peach, and we were both laughing, a genuine, unforced joy lighting up our faces. It was a rare, candid shot, a memory of a moment of genuine warmth and connection in a world that had become increasingly cold. I tucked it carefully between two sweaters in my bag, a small, precious talisman. When I was done, a life condensed into 22 inches of nylon and zippers, I walked back into the living room, suitcase in hand. Judith was sitting primly on the sofa, scrolling through her phone with a look of smug, unadulterated satisfaction. Alex was still by the window, a statue of cold indifference. My gaze, however, went immediately to Frank in his armchair. He was looking at me now, his usual mask of placid detachment gone, his expression etched with a profound sorrow that mirrored my own. I walked over to him, my footsteps unnaturally loud in the tense, charged silence. "Goodbye, Frank," I said softly, my voice catching. I leaned down and pressed a kiss to his cheek. His skin was cool and papery, and for a fleeting, heart-wrenching moment, he raised a hand as if to touch my arm, but it fell back to his lap, a gesture of defeat. He just nodded, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. I straightened up and turned to the front door, determined not to give Sam or Judith the satisfaction of a final, pleading look. I had my hand on the cold brass doorknob, ready to step out into the cold night and an unknown, terrifying future, when a voice, clear and steady and utterly unexpected, cut through the silence. "Stop!" I froze, My hand clamped on the doorknob, the cool metal a stark contrast to my suddenly clammy palm. The voice was Frank's. It was so unexpected, so firm and resonant in the silent room, that for a moment I thought I had imagined it, a desperate hallucination conjured by my broken heart. I turned slowly, my body stiff with disbelief. He was standing now, having pushed himself up from the armchair, with a quiet, deliberate determination. He wasn't looking at me. His gaze, sharp and penetrating, was fixed on his wife and son, and the gentle, almost invisible man I had always known was gone. In his place stood someone I had never seen before, someone with a spine forged of steel and a lifetime of quiet observation. Eleanor looked up from her phone, an expression of pure, unadulterated annoyance crossing her face. "Frank, what is it? Sit down. This doesn't concern you. This is between Sam and his wife." The hesitation before the word wife was a final petty twist of the knife. "It concerns everything," he said, his voice low but carrying an undeniable authority that instantly silenced the room. He took a slow, measured step forward, out of the shadows of his corner and into the light. "This house, Judith, you talk about it as if it's a crown you have the right to bestow upon whomever you deem worthy. You use it as a weapon, a tool to control, to punish, to validate your own twisted sense of superiority." Sam finally turned from the window, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Dad, what are you talking about? You and Mom gave us this house. It was a wedding gift." Frank shook his head slowly, a sad, weary gesture. "No," he said, the single word landing with the heavy, final weight of a gavel. "Your mother and I offered you the use of this house. We never, not for 1 second, gave it to you." Judith let out a sharp, disbelieving laugh, a sound like shattering glass. "Don't be ridiculous, Frank. This is absurd. The house is Sam's inheritance. We've discussed this 100 times. "Is it?" Frank replied, his calm unshakable in the face of her hysteria. He walked over to the mahogany bookcase that dominated the far wall, a piece of furniture he had built himself decades ago. He pulled out a small locked mahogany box, retrieved a small tarnished silver key from his pocket, and unlocked it. From within, he pulled out a single crisp, folded document. He held it up for them to see. "This is the deed to this property. I had my lawyer, Mr. Henderson, draw it up the month after Nora and Sam moved in. I thought about transferring the title then, but I never did. Something told me to wait. A gut feeling, perhaps, that your mother's generosity always comes with strings." He looked directly at Judith, and for the first time since I had known her, I saw her falter. A flicker of genuine uncertainty, of raw, primal fear, crossed her face. "The house, my dear," Frank said, his voice devoid of any warmth, any trace of the passive man she had controlled for so long, "is still and has always been in my name. Solely in my name." The silence that followed was absolute, a vacuum that sucked all the air out of the room. It was as if a bomb had detonated without a sound. Sam's jaw went slack, his eyes wide with a comical, childlike shock. Judith's face, which had been flushed with victory moments before, had gone a pale, sickly, mottled white. The weapon she had wielded against me, so masterfully, so cruelly, had just been revealed to be a dud, and the quiet, passive man she had dismissed and dominated for decades was the one holding all the power. Frank folded the deed with precise, deliberate movements and placed it carefully back in the box. "So, if anyone is leaving this house tonight," he said, his gaze sweeping from his stunned wife to his shell-shocked son, "it will not be Nora." Judith found her voice first, a shrill, panicked sound that was a stark, undignified contrast to her earlier composed cruelty. "Frank, this is insane! You can't be serious. You would humiliate me like this? In front of her? This is our son's home. You're choosing a worthless stranger over your own family?" "She is my family," Frank stated, the words simple but imbued with the weight of years of silent observation. He turned his eyes to me then, and they were filled with a fierce, protective light that warmed me to my core. "She has shown more kindness, more grace, and more respect in this house in 5 years than you have in 30, Judith." She has tried to build a life here, a real home, while all you have done is try to tear it down with your jealousy and your incessant need for control." He then shifted his gaze to Sam, his expression hardening from anger to one of deep, paternal disappointment. "And you, son. You let her. You stood by, and you let your mother poison your marriage. You let her bully your wife into a shadow of the vibrant woman she was when you met her. You traded your spine for her approval, and frankly, I am deeply and profoundly ashamed of you." Sam flinched as if he'd been physically struck. He opened his mouth, then closed it, looking like a lost little boy caught between two warring titans, his entire reality upended. I thought, we were just trying to help her," he stammered, the excuse sounding pathetic even to his own ears. "You thought what?" Frank challenged, his voice sharp. "That I would sit here in my chair forever and watch you break the heart of a good woman? That I would let you throw her out into the street with nowhere to go because she didn't meet your mother's impossible, ever-changing standards? I have been silent for far too long, Sam. But you should have known better than to mistake my silence for weakness. It was patience, and tonight my patience has finally run out." He walked back to his armchair, but didn't sit. He stood beside it, his posture straight and unyielding, a king reclaiming his throne in a kingdom he had long allowed to be mismanaged. "So here are the new terms," he said, his voice leaving absolutely no room for negotiation or argument. "Judith, you will hand over your key to this house. Immediately. Your unannounced visits, your inspections, your reign of terror. It's over. You will come here only when you are explicitly invited by Nora, and you will treat her with the respect she deserves. If you cannot do that, you will not come here at all." He then turned his steely gaze to Sam. "And you, son, will make a choice. Right now. You can start acting like a husband, a real partner to this woman who loves you, or you can pack a bag and go with your mother. The choice is yours. But let me be perfectly clear. Nora stays." Judith sputtered, her face a mask of disbelief and incandescent fury. "You can't do this to me, after all I've done for this family." "I just did," Frank said calmly, his words a final, immutable fact. The room was thick with a tension so palpable you could taste it. Sam looked at his mother's enraged face, then at my quiet waiting one, his own face a messy canvas of confusion, guilt, and abject fear. The foundation of his world had crumbled, and he didn't know where to stand. After a long, agonizing moment that stretched into an eternity, Frank's gaze softened as he looked at me. My forgotten suitcase was still by the door, a relic from a future that had just been averted. "Nora," he said gently, his voice once again quiet, but now full of warmth. "The choice is also yours. What do you want?" Everyone looked at me. For the first time, I was not the subject of their conversation. I was the one directing it. The power, startling and heavy, was finally in my hands. I stood there for what felt like a lifetime, the weight of 3 pairs of eyes on me, each projecting a different future. Judith's were filled with venom and the promise of retribution. Sam's were a swirling mess of a desperate, pleading hope, and Frank's held a quiet, steady support that felt like solid ground beneath my feet. I looked at my suitcase by the door, a symbol of my planned escape into an uncertain, lonely future that now seemed like a distant nightmare. Then I let my gaze wander around the living room, lingering on the soft sage-green walls, the refinished antique desk in the corner, the life I had poured my heart and soul into. It wasn't just a house. It was a home I had fought for, even when I didn't realize I was fighting. A home I had refused to completely surrender, even in my darkest moments. I took a deep, cleansing breath, the first one that didn't feel tight and constricted in my chest. "I want to stay," I said, my voice clear and strong, resonating in the quiet room with a confidence I hadn't felt in years. I saw a wave of profound relief wash over Frank's face. "But things have to change. Drastically." I turned to Sam, meeting his gaze directly and holding it. "I am not your mother's consolation prize, and I am not your project to be managed or fixed. I am your wife, your partner. If you want this marriage to have even a sliver of a chance of working, you will go to counseling with me, starting this week." You will learn to establish boundaries with her, and you will learn to stand up for me, not just when it's easy, but when it's hard. No more excuses. No more prioritizing keeping the peace at my expense. He nodded immediately, his eyes welling up with tears he didn't bother to hide. Okay, Nora, yes, anything, I promise, then. I turned to Judith. The smugness was gone, replaced by a sullen, bitter resentment that seemed to poison the air around her. You will treat me with civility, I said, echoing Frank's terms, but making them my own. You will respect my home, my marriage, and my decisions, and you will apologize. Not for protecting your son, but for actively trying to destroy his wife. She scoffed, a last gasp of her former power. Apologize? For what? For telling the truth? For every lie, every insult, and every moment you tried to make me feel small in my own home, I corrected, my voice unwavering. She opened her mouth to argue, a furious retort on her lips, but Frank cut her off with a single sharp look that brooked no dissent. Apologize, Judith, or leave and do not come back. The word hung between them, a final non-negotiable demand. Judith's jaw worked silently, a muscle twitching in her cheek. Finally, through gritted teeth, she muttered, I'm sorry. It was hollow, meaningless, devoid of any genuine remorse, but it wasn't for her. It was for me. It was the sound of her power breaking against the walls of the home she thought she owned. With a final, hateful glare, she slammed her key down on the coffee table and stormed out of the house without another word. The front door closed behind her, and the silence that filled the room was not tense or heavy, but blessedly light. Free. Sam took a tentative step toward me, his hands open at his sides. Nora, Not yet, I said, holding up a hand. I wasn't ready for his touch, for his promises. We have a lot of work to do. A lot. He nodded, his expression one of pained but total acceptance. He knew he had a long, arduous road ahead to earn back even a fraction of my trust, if he ever could. I walked over to Frank, who was now sitting back in his armchair, looking weary but profoundly at peace. I knelt beside him and took his hand. It was warm and strong in mine. Thank you, I whispered, my voice thick with an emotion too vast for words. He squeezed my hand gently, a small smile touching his lips. This house was always meant to be a home, Nora, he said, his voice soft, a place of safety and love. I just had to remind them of that. I stayed there for a moment, leaning against his chair, the two of us in the quiet living room, a silent, unlikely alliance. The future with Sam was a daunting question mark, but for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of the answer. I had found my voice, I had found an unexpected ally, and I had reclaimed my home. I wasn't the worthless, disappointing woman Judith had tried to make me. I was the one who had stayed, the one who had won. And this house, with its sage green walls and its quiet, gentle guardian, was finally, truly mine.